Welcome to the channel. So today I'm reacting to Jeremy Clarkson's The Greatest Raid of All, which is by North One. However, because that version had a lot of copyright issues, I'm actually going to react to the full version on the Timeline channel. And just like Clarkson's Victoria Cross video, I did not research this video at all because everyone told me that me researching beforehand would not do me any good, and because of just how good of storyteller that Clarkson is. And because of the length of the video, I will break it up into two parts. Let's get to it.
A couple of years ago, I made a TV program about my father-in-law who won a Victoria Cross at Arnhem. And since then, I've been on the hunt for a follow-up, another nugget of incredible heroism in the face of impossible odds. Of course, most war stories are well known, well documented, and well celebrated. The Battle of Britain, Rorke's Drift, and so on. But one day, while trolling through a second-hand bookshop, I came across a story that's hardly known or celebrated at all. It's the story of an amazing battle, a battle where more VCs were earned more quickly than any other action in the Second World War. It's a story full of ingenuity, pluck, and genuine courage. It had the lot. Having read it, I decided to do some digging. And it turned out that while very few people in the outside world know anything about this extraordinary battle, they certainly do in military circles. And they call it the greatest raid of all. In 1941, the Battle of Britain was won. But the Battle of the Atlantic was still raging, and we were losing. German U-boats were running amok among the convoys bringing supplies from America. 9 million tons of shipping had already been sunk, and the shipyards in Britain simply couldn't replace it fast enough. Britain was beginning to starve. Winston Churchill said in his diaries, the only thing that truly frightened me in the war was the U-boat peril. Said he was even more anxious about the Battle of the Atlantic than he was about the Battle of Britain. And then into the equation sailed the Tirpitz.
So I'm going to try to remember some details from when I reacted to Sabaton History's The Bismarck. But the Tirpitz, I believe it did spend some time in the Atlantic, but it did end up going to Norway, where it became the gem of the Baltic Fleet. But the Tirpitz was the sister ship of the Bismarck, but it was actually heavier, faster, and more powerful. It was the most powerful warship ever built by a European navy. The most powerful battleship in the world, though, belonged to Japan, and that was the Yamato or the Yamamoto, but I think that was commissioned close to a year after the Tirpitz.
Tirpitz was the fastest and most modern battleship in the war. Even though her armour was a foot thick, she could thunder along at 30 knots. And with 8 15-inch guns, she packed a huge punch. Certainly, the Royal Navy had very little in its arsenal to take on a ship of this magnitude.
Any history buffs out there that can tell me where that photo was taken?
And that was a nightmare for the people who worked here in Churchill's war rooms. Each of these dots on this map represents a convoy movement. If Tirpitz got among them beyond the range of the Royal Air Force, we would almost certainly lose the war. It was that simple. There was, however, a drawback to Tirpitz's size. You see, if she were to be damaged while out in the middle of the Atlantic, she couldn't very well go back to Germany for repairs, because that would mean limping past Britain, past the RAF, past our coastal fleet, and that would be a death sentence for her. So she'd have to go to a dry dock on the Atlantic coast of France. but there was only one dry dock on the Atlantic coast of France that was big enough to handle a ship of Tirpitz's size. This one. This is the Normandy dock in Saint-Nazaire. It had been built in the 30s when France was making giant ocean liners. And now, to make sure the Tirpitz could never have a home on the Atlantic seaboard, it had to be destroyed. Now, the only way that you could put this dock out of action is to destroy this gate. And that was a problem. It couldn't be done with a naval bombardment because the mouth of the estuary is actually 6 miles away in that direction. It couldn't be done with a submarine because this whole area was crisscrossed with anti-submarine nets. Couldn't be done over land because northern France was in German hands, and for 2 reasons, it couldn't be done from the air either. Firstly, Second World War bombing raids were notoriously inaccurate. Only 22% of bombs landed within 5 miles of the target.
22% landed within 5 miles of the target? Why? Because I know in the bombers, they did have sites where they could actually line up the bombs, so wow.
So the chances of being able to hit a dock gate from 6,000 feet in the sky were slim at the best of times. And it wouldn't be the best of times because right next door to the dry dock were 14 U-boat pens. These were some of the most precious facilities in the German armory, and to protect them, the Saint-Nazaire area bristled with 80 anti-aircraft guns and artillery pieces. And in the town itself, there were 5,000 troops. Destroying the dock then using conventional forces, the army, the air force, the navy, out of the question. So, the job was given to a group of men who really had only just been put together. The commandos.
Unconventional warfare specialists. So he said commandos. He did not use the word SAS or SBS. So does that mean that this was a separate entity? Or maybe some of these commando units actually grew into the SBS and the SAS? If you know, please drop it in the comments.
The commandos were the brainchild of Churchill, who'd seen similar outfits operate successfully in both the Boer War and the First World War. A small number of highly trained soldiers would get in fast, do a huge amount of damage, and then get out before the enemy had time to get organised. Churchill liked this. He called it the butcher and bolt approach. So what kind of men were they? Well, if popular myth is anything to go by, they were lantern-jawed killing machines who could headbutt their way through oak doors. The reality, though, was rather different.
Gerard Brett in my regiment was in my commando, 12 Commando, and he'd written a book on the Byzantine age or Byzantine architecture or something.
One fellow who got a divinity degree from Trinity College, Dublin.
Lance Corporal Potts had been a don at either Oxford or Cambridge.
They included a poacher, a TT, motorcycle rider, so a mixed bag.
What they represented was a complete revolution in the concept of soldiering. Because they were chosen for their individuality, their intelligence, their initiative. And nobody embodied that ethos more than this man, Mickey Byrne. I've got his autobiography here, and what a life. He had a privileged upbringing, Winchester, Oxford, and then he met Guy Burgess, the chap who went on to become a Soviet spy, and they became lovers. Mickey, though, became a Nazi sympathiser, went to Germany, met Hitler, got a signed copy of Mein Kampf, and was one of the very first people to be shown around Dachau, the concentration camp. He knew Bertrand Russell, he knew Audrey Hepburn, he knew the King and Queen, he even met Roosevelt. He really was a Telegraph obituary writer's wet dream. But all things considered, not the sort of man you'd expect to find in a commando's green beret. By the start of the war, however, Mickey had seen the Nazi threat for what it really was, and had found something else to suit his maverick streak: the commandos.
He sounded like he lived a very interesting life. Wow.
People were left to make up their own minds. In war, everybody may be killed, and what decides the action may be the action of a private soldier who's left to command a trench. It wasn't put like that, but the feeling we were given that every single one of us might be as important as a brigadier. We were all individuals, you know. Discipline did matter, of course, but I wouldn't have said it was absolutely first.
The commando forces were made up of volunteers from any of the regular army units, and the philosophy of how they went about their daily business was a million miles from that of the conventional military. For a start, they didn't bother with barracks or regimental headquarters because the commandos didn't want to waste training time on mundane chores such as cleaning or maintenance. Instead, they simply got digs in a nearby town. And there was no sergeant major on hand to tell them what to do every minute of the day.
Instead of saying parade tomorrow on the main square in Weymouth, it might be parade tomorrow at 10 o'clock on the in the marketplace at Dorchester, and find your own bloody way there, you know.
You weren't shouted at. There wasn't any of this shouting or bullying or anything that you got in the regular army. You led by example, so, you know, the officer had to do everything that you did.
If the officers can do it, I can do it. If the officers can do it.
Unfortunately, though, the British Army top brass were a deeply conservative bunch, and they really didn't like the new commando philosophy.
The regular army were doing their best to get us disbanded. They hated us, some of them. We were a nuisance.
And because our standards were so high, we'd creamed off the best of the people in the regiments. And in fact, a lot of COs refused to allow people to volunteer.
This resistance by the regular army certainly got Churchill's back up.
If you're doing something like this that's actually causing people to complain, then that means that you're probably doing something right.
What I have here is a letter he wrote to the Secretary of State for War. And he says, "I hear that the whole position of the commandos is being questioned. They've been told no more recruiting and that their future is in the melting pot." Says he feels very strongly about this. Says the defeat of France by Germany was accomplished by an incredibly small number of highly equipped elite, while the dull mass of the German army came on behind. And then here, for every reason, therefore, we must develop the commando idea. Pretty clear cut. As 1941 drew to a close, Japan joined the war, and the Royal Navy had to send a fleet to the Far East. So there was even less to hold the Tirpitz at bay. What's more, we were losing the Battle of the Atlantic. We were losing in North Africa, and London was in ruins. So if Churchill's commandos really could smash up Saint-Nazaire, it might give a sense back home that Britain wasn't finished just yet.
Everywhere almost we were on retreat, and people were really becoming negative, and Churchill wanted something which would be successful aggression.
The plan to destroy the 1,500-ton dock gate was codenamed Operation Chariot, and it was certainly bold. The commandos would get hold of a couple of destroyers from somewhere and sail them from Cornwall over to western France. Now, one of these destroyers would be filled with explosives. And while the RAF distracted the Germans with a bombing raid over Saint-Nazaire, they would somehow sneak it up the estuary without being seen by anyone in the gun emplacements here, 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 and here. Or by anyone with a searchlight here, 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 and here. And then, to see what happens next, we have to turn to the actual model built to plan the raid. The destroyer, with the explosives in it, would ram the dock gates here, and the commandos would jump off, and right underneath all the guns positioned to protect the U-boat pens here, they'd run around shooting anything that moved and blowing up anything that didn't. Then, after the destroyer exploded, destroying the lock gate, they'd all meet here at this not at all exposed jetty and get back on the second destroyer, which somehow wouldn't have been blown to pieces while it was hanging around in the estuary for a couple of hours waiting for them to finish. It would then sail back down the estuary, past all the guns, and go home. Right.
Does anybody else find this plan too hard to believe? How was this even feasible? I guess they kind of have the element of surprise because I don't think the Germans would ever expect anyone to try to do that. Even if they did make it through the inlet and was able to ram the gate, did they have plan Bs in case things went wrong? Like the second destroyer getting sunk? How are they supposed to get home? Oh my goodness. This is going to be good to see if they can pull this off. Oh, I'm definitely excited right now.
The plan was presented to the War Office by Louis Mountbatten, head of the Combined Operations Unit. And unsurprisingly, it met resistance. One commander-in-chief was particularly vocal.
I remember he started the meeting by saying, well, Dickie, old cock, if you're prepared to lose all your soldiers and all your ships, I suppose you can take on this task, which I regard as absolutely impossible. I said, it's the fact that it is regarded as impossible, which makes it possible. The Germans will never think we'll attempt it.
So I'm trying to remember why I know the name Lord Mountbatten. It is a name I know I've come across in some of these reaction videos. He's a naval officer, so he was not involved at the Somme. I want to say Gallipoli, but that sounds wrong. I got it. He was the last Viceroy of India until partition and transfer of power in 1947. That's why I know him.
Mountbatten's enthusiasm certainly didn't rub off on the RAF. You can see here in these Operation Chariot minutes that the powers that be requested a force of about 100 aircraft for the diversionary bombing raid in 3 waves. But on the back, Vice Marshal Saunby says, I don't agree that such a heavy scale of attack is needed. We want about 20 Whitleys, which are bombers, hanging around overhead, dropping an occasional bomb. And he's backed up by one of his advisors, this chap called Willits, who really says that Operation Chariot can whistle for their 100 bombers. He says Bomber Command can provide no more than 35 aircraft without prejudicing their other commitments. You might have thought the Navy would be keen, especially since the operation was designed to neutralise the Tirpitz. But no. The Commander-in-Chief here from Plymouth Command writes, the plan entails the sacrifice of the landing party and endangers 2 valuable ships for a small chance of success. He actually says negligible chance here. And there's another guy writing here who says, I'm not hopeful as regards the result of the impact between the destroyer and the lock gates. I think the lock gates will remain partially intact and the destroyer will look silly. If that happens, much of the proposed plan fails. Eventually, though, the Navy did find one boat. It was called HMS Campbelltown, a clapped-out American World War I destroyer that was on loan to the British. She was not ideal for the job, known for her poor slow-speed manoeuvrability and her large turning circle. But these drawbacks didn't dampen the spirits of the commandos.
I thought we would get away with it, that I would be wounded romantically and a beautiful nurse would look after me in hospital. I was very young.
You were doing all this heavy training and nothing's happening, so very frustrated. So I think when we were finally briefed on the model, I mean, we thought, well, hell, this is going to be something.
We had been trained, both in the dark, blindfolded in the day, in every form of demolition to do with dock demolitions, trains and anything. So when we heard that we were going to blow up the dock installations at Saint Nazaire, I suppose really it was a feeling of elation.
At this stage, people were saying, well, what do you think? To me, you see. And I said, it's going to be a piece of cake. We're going to go in there and knock them for six, because that reflected the optimistic attitude. We were going to go in there, blow up this bloody dock, and we'll be out.
We had volunteered, after all, for danger. And it did seem an off chance that it was impossible, and therefore it would succeed.
As the commandos prepared on land, the Navy set about the Campbelltown. The old tub would have to sneak past 80 gun emplacements on its way up the Saint-Nazaire estuary, so it had to be disguised, and they only had 12 days to do the work. In the end, they removed 2 funnels and sloped the other 2 backwards, so at a glance it looked a bit like a German destroyer. And then there was the problem of turning it into a time bomb. This job was given to a brilliant young naval officer called Lieutenant Nigel Tirpitz. He was a shy chap with a stammer who, when his girlfriend announced that she'd become fond of him, replied, "Well, then I suppose we shall have to get married." However, while he was not desperately confident with women, he was a whiz with explosives.
So I've never seen a flag with a red dot in the corner. Can someone tell me what that is, please?
One of the best students the Dartmouth Naval College had ever seen. But even he faced difficulties with how you turn a whole ship into a bomb. The first problem he had was deciding where in the ship to place the explosives. Because you see, if you can imagine, this is the gate to the dock and this is the ship. What's going to happen after it hits? I mean, is it just going to end up here, in which case you want the bomb in the front? Or is it going to rear up, in which case you want the bomb sort of in the middle, toward the bottom? I suppose theoretically it would be possible, if the ship were going fast enough, for it to actually ride right over the top of the gate and end up in the dock itself. I mean, who knew? Day and night, Tirpitz struggled with this until he decided on a spot 40 feet back from the prow, low down, next to the keel. Then he had to work out how to set the explosives off. Back then there was no accurate timing device, so he had to use fuses, like this.
What is a keel?
The idea is that you squeeze the top part here, which breaks a glass capsule on the inside, releasing acid that then slowly burns through a strip of wire. Now, when that snaps, it releases a spring which boings out, setting off the detonator. Now, this was very advanced in 1942, but there were a couple of problems. First of all, it was very susceptible to jolts and shock. You wouldn't, for instance, want to ram some lock gates at 25 miles an hour with one of these on board, because it might go off instantly, killing everyone. It was also very vague. The strength of the acid varied from fuse to fuse, the strength of the wire varied, the tension of the spring varied. Tirpitz couldn't say to within an hour when the bomb might actually go off. Choosing what explosive to use, however, was fairly straightforward. He went for amatol, and to show how big a bang that produces, we've placed a pound of something similar between the front seats of this car.
3, 2, 1, fire in!
That was a pound. Tirpitz was going to use 4 1/4 tons. Still, even if the explosives and the fuses could be trusted to work properly, and even if they could get across to France without being detected and up the estuary without being blown to smithereens, and even if the Campbelltown could hit the lock gates exactly right and the commandos could get off and do whatever it is they had to do, they still had a problem. How do they get home again? Because the Navy wouldn't provide a second destroyer, they were instead given 16 of these. Today, this Fairmile ML is a tourist boat taking trippers around Tor Bay, and certainly it's better suited to this than it ever was for Operation Chariot.
They're made of Bakelite bonded plywood.
It was a cheap, mass-production boat designed primarily to make the Navy look bigger than it really was.
232. May God speed all who sail in her.
It certainly wasn't particularly good in the open sea. It tended to roll badly in a swell, which made everyone on board queasy. It's not so bad if it was only used to bring the soldiers home, but this little fleet would also be used to get half the commandos out to Saint-Nazaire as well. So there'd be 15 commandos wedged down here with all their kit. And when they got to the other end, they'd be expected to get out and start fighting immediately.
It's a jerry.
There wasn't only seasickness to worry about, because while each ship had small guns fore and aft, it didn't have any armour. No, really. All that stood between the German guns and the men down here were, a few planks of wood. And to make matters worse, each boat was fitted with 2 500-gallon long-range fuel tanks, which were completely exposed on the deck. Campbelltown was a bomb on purpose. These things, they were bombs by accident. Honestly, it's hard to think of any vessel less well-suited to the job in hand.
Whose idea was it to use these boats? Oh my goodness.
The commandos were hard men, good fighters. But they'd been picked for their intelligence as well, so they must have known that the chances of getting to Saint-Nazaire were small. The chances of doing the job were microscopic, and the chances of them getting home again on a wooden boat, groaning under the weight of exposed fuel tanks past an alerted enemy, were virtually non-existent. They must have known that Operation Chariot, for the vast majority, was going to be a one-way ticket.
We were all of us told if we wanted to leave a letter for our next of kin, our loved ones, you could do so. And you wrote on the envelope to be posted in the event of my failing to return.
And there was one, Sergeant Bill Gibson, who I knew them all very well indeed. And I remember seeing his face, and I knew he was going to be killed.
My dearest Dad, by the time you get this, I shall be one of the many who have sacrificed their unimportant lives for what little ideals we may have. I can only hope that by laying down my life, the generations to come might in some way remember us and benefit by what we've done. At a time like this, I turn to you, Dad, and God. I hope there will be peace for everyone soon. My love to everyone. I'll remember you. Your loving son, Bill.
And that is why videos like this are so important. We have to just understand what they actually did. You know, they truly were the greatest generation.
Somehow I thought it's unlucky to write your last letter to your parents. No, my attitude was I'm coming back.
Two of men came to me and said, would you take these letters home to our wives?
if we're killed. And I said, but wait a minute, I'm going with you. Oh, you won't be killed, I said. They were both killed.
The Saint-Nazaire raiders weren't allowed to reveal details of the operation to their loved ones. But for the bomb designer Nigel Tirpitz, recently married and the father of a young son, the thought of keeping his wife in the dark was too much. So he told her. And she said afterwards they both sort of knew he wouldn't be coming back.
I'm sorry. Oh, that letter. I think Clarkson was right. I think they all knew that this was going to be a suicide mission. Yet they still wanted to go and to do their duty. Once the next part is up, I'll put it right here. And right here, I'm going to put a World War II history video, possibly the story of the Bismarck. Please don't forget to hit the like button. Thanks for watching.